is always by your side.
The time is just gone, 19 minutes past 9 a.m. as we continue with News and Views this morning. And it's time now to look at PEPUDA, which is the promotion of equality and prevention of unfair discrimination. Now, there are serious concerns. There are concerns that if the bill is adopted in its current form, the state will effectively disallow beliefs and practices that it deems to be discriminatory or against a predetermined definition of equality. And at the same time, concerns with regarding to allowing the state to prescribe what may or what may not be said, published, or propagated. And we have got panelists this morning consisting of Johannesburg-based senior counsel attorney Aslam Bava. We've got the ACDP Chief Whip Steve Swart, and also the chairperson of SAMNET with us this morning. To all the panelists, as we welcome you to the show, to News and Views this morning on Salam Media. Assalamu alaikum and good morning.
Assalamu alaikum.
Yes, Advocate Bauer, welcome, and also to Stephen Swart and Dr. Faisal Suleiman. Just to start off with, and we're starting with Advocate Aslam Bava this morning, just to give us a brief overview on the need for PEPUDA. Do we have a need for the promotion of equality and prevention of unfair discrimination act with regard to the government, and obviously now asking for public comment?
Yes, so just starting on that, there is an absolute need to have PEPUDA as an act. We must not confuse PEPUDA as the act. It's also called the Equality Act. We must not confuse that with the current bill that is currently being mooted. The difference between that is the act was passed. As we know, we've got a very sore history as far as apartheid and racial discrimination has been in our country. And in terms of Section 9 of the Constitution, every citizen of this country is allowed or is afforded the right to have equal protection before the law. So in terms of Section 23 of the Constitution, the government was obliged to pass an act which would afford every citizen that right of equality. And that was the right that was set out in the act in 2000. And that's where I said, perhaps we need to just pause there. We are not talking about the act itself. The act is crucial and it's imperative and it's important for the protection of each individual's rights as far as the equality is concerned. What we are talking about that is problematic and appears to be problematic is the current bill that is being mooted and that is being discussed, which seeks to change and amend the act. The act itself works very well. It works in conjunction with equality courts. The equality courts are set up in each of our court structures, and people who find that they are being treated unfairly or discriminated against may bring a case in the equality court. So PEPUDA itself is a very good piece of legislation. The amendment is a different story. That is where the concern is.
Yes, and I'd just like to bring in Steve Swart into the discussion. Now, obviously, as a political party, and you are a faith-based political party, and we've seen faith-based institutions that have expressed certain serious concerns in terms of the bill and how it will basically override or trample on the constitutional right to freedom of religion. What are some of the issues, Stephen?
No, good morning, Inayet, and good morning to the colleagues. Thank you for the invitation. And a warm greeting from the ACDT. Salam alaikum to all of my colleagues there. And thank you. Yes, firstly, of course, it's very important to understand the ACDP stands for freedom of religion. And yes, I'm a member of the Justice Portfolio Committee. And this proposal has been brought by the Justice Department. So it is still in early stages. But I'm very pleased that faith-based organizations are expressing deep concerns. The Constitutional Court has already found that religion plays a very important role in society in South Africa. And I think that the concerns that I'm having studied this bill last night and having a look at some of the issues here, the extension of equal rights is, of course, a great concern to us, because I believe that the present formulation in the Act has been applied, as my colleague Advocate Bava indicated, and even that, if you also look at the recent Supreme Court of Appeal case where Judge Mohammed Nafsa indicated challenges with the present definitions in the present Act, such as the concept of hurtful. Here we've got a concept of prejudice, which is so broad, and it impacts every faith-based organization, every company, every individual. Here we focus today on faith-based organization. For example, the amendment bill provides now for equal rights and access to resources, opportunities, benefits, advantages. Now that is far beyond the scope of Section 9 of the Constitution. Everyone is granted equal rights and opportunities to become a member or an employee or a leader of a church, of a mosque, even if their beliefs are in direct conflict with those of the church and of the mosque. And I think these are some of the concerns that are very, very profound in this draft bill. One of the issues as well is that the minister, any minister will be able to issue codes against individuals, against organizations, and in particularly NGOs, and I'm aware that my colleague Mr. Suleiman from the SA Muslim Network is here. That's an NGO. So you have a minister issuing codes of conduct, regulations that will impact you. And we saw the impact with the Disaster Management Act, with the regulations that were issued there, and the impact that it had on churches and mosques, and how many of those regulations were struck down by the courts. So we can't allow this to continue, that the government will then determine and impact freedom of religion. And I believe many of these clauses would go against our rights of religious freedom. And I believe that I'm surprised that it is coming, given the fact that the Human Rights Commission, that's going to be given such an important role to play, is already struggling with the present Act, is already struggling with a limited budget. And I would suggest that the department that is also struggling with the courts, I'm sure Advocate Bava will agree with me, the difficulty with court backlogs, should rather focus their attention on court backlogs, apply the existing law, and stop trying to add powers to government which are totally unacceptable and, in my view, unconstitutional.
Yes, I'd like to bring Dr. Faisal Suleiman into the discussion. Now, obviously, Faisal, you've heard what Advocate Bava has to say, and also Stephen, and looking at where we are as a country, as a nation, and we've always enjoyed freedom of religion. It is entrenched. It is entrenched in the constitution of the country as well. Now, for people like yourselves, for NGOs, as Stephen alluded to as well, obviously this has there could be consequences.
Thank you so much, Inayet. Assalamu alaikum and good morning. I was having a little bit of trouble hearing you guys, but I hope I'm clear now. Absolutely. If I can maybe give an example. Some people may be aware, some of the listeners and viewers, of the Spingo case, the Azan case, where this gentleman in a predominantly Indian, significant Muslim population suburb went to court to object to the Azan, and he said in an interview, I don't think it's in a court paper, but I read it in an interview, that he found the words part of the Azan that there is only one God objectionable, and it was an imposition of the Muslim religious faith on him. So that as a neighbor just listening to the Azan, he said that was one of the basis of his objection. Now, of course, that case is still to be appealed and appeal to be heard. But here's a very clear example. The call to prayer is 1440 years old. It's not an imposition. It's a call meant for Muslims. But this neighbor said, now, if with these amendments that we're talking about, here's a very clear-cut example of literally then the onus is going to be on the religious institutions. Here's a person, there's absolutely no imposition on him. It's a call to prayer meant for Muslims, not for anybody else. So can you imagine something like that. What the emphasis now should have been in this case, and I think the legal experts agree on him to prove that this judge, in what has been described as a really pathetic ruling, ruled in his favor. But I'm sure the appeal will sort that out. But the point is that with the amendments, something like that will come into force, and not only will it be a problem for a religious institution, as has been mentioned. There's this talk about the resources. In other words, then the mosque would have to take its resources, sparse as they may be, to then go out and have to compensate him or provide equality for him, because he finds those words objectionable. So one can see the practical implications of this. Clearly, the senior advocate Aslam will speak to the legalese of it. But in terms of freedom of religion, in terms of the ability to practice, and look, the elephant in the room for many of the Abrahamic faith is going to be the LGBT community. I think as far as the Muslims are concerned, the vast majority of consensus of Muslim scholars all over the world is that it is, and I think here it's important to distinguish between what is not permissible and homophobia. I think there's a huge difference that perhaps sometimes is not clear, but saying something is not permissible in the Islamic faith, and in our faith, we would not permit, for example, a same-sex marriage and the laws that go with it, inheritance and all of that, versus saying we are homophobic or we are against the LGBT community is something different. Is different. Persecution is different from saying something is not permissible. Just like we have, for example, in our laws of inheritance, they may not be something that the others may agree with, but that is what the Quran prescribes for us. So the implications of these amendments, I think in summary, it has been said, an absolute attack on freedom to practice your religious beliefs. The Bible has verses that sometimes are described, whether it's the Old Testament in particular, as violent. They are there. Does that mean? And of course, there are one or two verses in the Quran, depending on the context that you read them in, that allow offensive or defensive words, particularly defensive words or defensive retaliation. Does that mean then, you can't? Another example I'd like to use, and unfortunately the ACDP is on the wrong side of history and the law on this side, is going to be the recent what has happened in Palestine. I think the ACDP, who are unfortunately the official or spokesman of Israel in Parliament with the DA, the fact is that freedom of religion that we so firmly want, people don't have freedom of life there. And here we've had criticism of Israel. And some people would like to see criticism of Israel, for example, equated with anti-Semitism. And if you have these laws, you could very well have a Zionist or even the people from the ACDP themselves that say, oh, this is an attack on Judaism. Which clearly, it is not. But you could stretch this law to any way you want it and find that objectionable. So the implications for NGOs, for religious freedom are huge. And I know certainly at SEMNET we are mobilizing to ensure that our public, we are going to be calling for the next few Friday lectures to be dedicated to this law until the 30th of, or not before that objection, the due date. The next Friday, the few Fridays, we are putting out calls already that the imams dedicate the Friday lecture to addressing this, getting congregations to object, and clearly, there has to be mass mobilization from the broader religious and NGO civil society to oppose what clearly is an attack on religious freedom.
Well, shukran for that, Faisal. And I see the United Ulama Council of South Africa has also issued an appeal with regard to the objection to these proposed amendments. Gentlemen, I'm going to put you on hold. We're going to go for a quick ad break. We'll be back.
The Al Shazia Weekend Winter Sale now on. 20% off all ladies and girls abayas, 15% off all plain and branded abayas, 20% off all Samira kaftans, 20% off selected kurtas. Run up to our sizzling specials this winter. 3 days only, 11, 12 and 13 June. Al Shazia, the scarf specialist. 215 Sparks Road, Overport, Durban. Call 031 207 6462. Al Shazia.
A strip of land with over 2 million people blockaded for 13 years. Healthcare is on its knees, food is scarce, and water is inadequate. COVID has wreaked havoc in the lives of the people of Gaza. 53% of the population live below the poverty line. 80% of Gaza relies on external aid to survive, and 20,000 children are now orphans. The future is bleak. Please, don't forget Gaza. Donate now to Islamic Relief.
Rejuvenate.
The time is just gone, 9:34 a.m. We continue with the panel discussion looking at PEPUDA this morning. Advocate Bava, just to come through to you. Now, obviously, there are two issues, and one, obviously, in terms of looking at the definition of equality and how this obviously talks about equal rights, it talks about opportunities, but also in terms of how it stands up to the Constitution. And the second issue, and we've heard about certain examples, you know, and living in a multicultural, in a multi-religious society. And this bill, if it goes through in its present form, could present certain problems and legal challenges as well.
Yes, let me just address those issues with you, and perhaps just, I think for the listeners and perhaps for ourselves, just to refer to the bill itself and to see where we identify problematic areas. So firstly, the Act itself is sufficient. The PEPUDA Act that was passed in 2000, to our minds, is sufficient. In the Kwalani case, Judge Nafsai, you see, raised the issue about the definitions being too broad and unconstitutional. But in terms of this bill, and I just want to draw a demarcation so that the listeners understand, firstly, it is not an imposition by the state. It is rather any interest group who wishes to have a bill, an act amended, would make a proposal and would introduce such aspects that they want to put into law. It is then for the Law Commission to then submit these for comments, and this is the stage at which this bill is. But I want to take us through some of the aspects so I think we can understand what particularly is problematic as far as the bill is concerned. Firstly, the aspect of discrimination. So in the Act as it stood and as it stands currently, it requires an intention to discriminate. What the bill seeks to suggest is to take away the element of intention. So they want to introduce the words whether discrimination, whether intentionally or not. So whether you intend to discriminate or not, in our law, we call it a strict liability, which means that basically it doesn't matter what you intended. The fact that a person feels discriminated, and we'll come to that aspect, is sufficient. There's two additional aspects that they want to add to discrimination. It says causes prejudice to or otherwise undermines the dignity of. Now, these are two additional portions that they want to put as C and D. And so it becomes a very subjective element, which it was, in a sense, that discrimination is a subjective element. But what they seek to do now is they seek to make it of such a broad category that almost any conduct could be reported to the Equality Court. So if you come in, you say it's causing me prejudice or it undermines my dignity, irrespective, and because it's a strict liability, the mosque, the imam, and we'll come later on when the definition of organizations are expanded, could be hauled before court, and it could lead to a flood of litigation. Then it also, in terms of discrimination, says, irrespective of whether or not the discrimination on a particular ground was the sole or dominant reason for the discriminatory act or omission. So an imam giving a talk in the mosque, or a priest giving a talk in the church would say something that the person feels oh, it's causing me prejudice, or it's discriminating against me, therefore I'm going to take this to the Equality Court and charge the Imam for contravening this act. And this act has consequences, has serious consequences in terms of the law. And when we look at, for example, the word equality, like was said, it now goes, they want in the provision of equality to say equal right and access to resources, opportunities, benefits, and advantages. Now, that again is so broad that any person could come in and say, I'm sorry, I don't have equal rights and access to the resources, to the opportunities, benefits, and advantages, and I need it. And they have to be substantively equal. Then the next aspect, and I'm sorry if you need to interrupt me, please do, because there are quite a few portions, and you may want to ask many more questions of other parties. So if you want me to pause there, I don't mind pausing.
Yes, please, Advocate Bava, I would appreciate that, because I'd like to bring Stephen into this discussion. And I think one of the key issue is with regard to empowerment to discriminate. And I think being a member of parliament and looking at it from the government's perspective, looking at obviously possible abuse of power as a result of the bill, if it does go through, Stephen. Just your thoughts, because at the end of the day, we know the governments of the day have certain objectives, they have certain agendas as well. And if it does not confirm, does this bill leave one open to abuse of power?
No, absolutely, Inayet. And firstly, may I just say to Dr. Suleiman, I appreciate his sentiments, but I think on this issue, we can definitely work together as a part of the Abrahamic faiths, given our deep concerns, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to share our concerns with the panel and with your viewers. Now, we have seen the state's attempt to control religion when you saw the CRRL report on religions, and that was a very clear indication. That is the Commission for Religious Linguistic rights in terms of the Constitution, and their report that came out with a very strict proposal to regulate all religions. And thankfully, that has not seen the light of day, but the proposal there was to amend their act to give that commission far greater powers to regulate religions. So there is, in my view, no doubt that this act will be used by government to try to control religion. And we from the ACDP will fight for freedom of religion. And that is so important. Myself, I'm grateful to be the longest serving member on the Justice Committee. But the question arises, where does this proposal come from? Given the fact that even we in the Justice Committee are waiting for the outcome of the Constitutional Court in the Kwelani matter to deal with what has already been found unconstitutional by the SCA relating to hate speech. And that is an aspect that needs to be dealt with. I would have thought that the Department of Justice should rather be looking at anticipating a judgment that needs amendments to PEPUDA linked to hate speech provisions, where it's now very clear. And I'm glad that my colleague raised the issue of the LGBT community and how this could be used, where activists could be used in this regard to make use of the much broader definitions in terms of the proposed amendment to then come against religious, all of our faith-based organizations and insist on promoting their rights, which I would believe would be in certain regards unconstitutional. So yes, we've seen the abuse of power with, as I mentioned earlier, with the Disaster Management Act, the regulations that are promoted in terms of that act, where Parliament has got no say over those regulations. We try to exercise oversight. Now, I, on a closer reading, am deeply concerned. It doesn't say the minister, which would be the Minister of Justice. It says a minister. So it could be any minister could issue codes, regulations, which we then as Parliament would not have insight into those regulations. And so I commend the panel, I commend you for as being the host for taking a strong stance on this issue. And we from our perspective would like to join you in expressing our deep opposition to this and our concerns about the abuse of power by the state.
Yes, Faisal Suleiman, just to bring you into the discussion now. Obviously, Faisal, we've seen right across the world, when we're looking at Europe, we see what has happened in France. When we talk of, these type of laws, obviously aimed, we know that, many of them are Islamophobic, but when the state tries to control religious institutions, when they have what they call homegrown imams, when they talk about what may be said, what may not be said in a mosque, and looking at where we are in South Africa, a democracy, where we've come from, and at this point in time, it does appear that this is going to revolutionize what is termed our legal system. When one looks at some of the issues that Advocate Bava has already unpacked, and from what Stephen is just saying.
Yes, Inayet, these amendments bring to the fore many other questions. Clearly, government was lobbied by particular interest groups to bring forth these amendments. Aslam has adequately spoken to the legalese of, and he'll expand again. We've already said that I don't think there's doubt, having looked at this, that this is an affront, this is an attack on religion. But there's another aspect to this that I think must wake us up. Clearly, post 1994, civil society has gone to sleep. The fact that I may have load shedding any moment now is testament to where our country is. And I think, beyond the deadline for this, I think it is not just in terms of civil society, politically, in terms of corruption and everything else that don't need expansion. I think people of morality with a moral compass need to coalesce, notwithstanding, for example, our serious differences with the ACDP on some foreign affairs policies. I think we need to get together beyond this, because there is a concerted effort all over the world to attack religion. And I think we have the churches, the mosques, the temples, the synagogues have taken a backseat in terms of being proactive in the legislature, in terms of being proactive in the levers of power, whether it's parliament, whether it's the portfolio committees, etc. And I think we must reclaim the space. We have left a space that has been exploited by interest groups, whether for example, as a doctor, clearly in terms of health, the tobacco lobby, the alcohol lobby, for example, and in religion, we've stepped back, and others have filled the space. I think, for example, now in our country, moral voices need to come to the fore. We have an election coming up, and I think the voices of the churches, the voices of the synagogues and temples have to be heard. And we have to go and say that we have to exert a moral compass. We have to exert not just religious freedom, but the accountability that religion brings to us in terms of our actions, in terms of politicians, etc. So there's a broader issue here at play, and that is the general attack on religion. The Satanism, etc., are coming to the fore. In some places, Satanists have more rights than the religious communities. And I think we need to reclaim the space that we have abandoned. So yes, and I think you speak about clearly Muslims. You mentioned France, and I think one of the problems is, and we see it in India, 100 million Muslims have allowed a racist, fundamentalist, Hindutva, neo-Nazi organization to come to power. I think more political lobbying there, more organization, perhaps could have swayed some of the direction of those votes. And I think South Africa as well. Our community has not been as active in politics and in voting as we should have been, or we can be. And I think these are the spaces that have to occupy the discourse in mosques, on programs such as yours. The influences our theological bodies have to come now to the fore and exert the kind of pressure and moral suasion that is needed to get not just religion but morality back on track.
Well, Shukran, for that, the time is just gone 9:48 a.m. We're going to go for a quick break. We'll be back.
Road in Durban, head on over for the Taste with Kick. We offer something scrumptious for everyone in the family. Wraps, chicken tikka, burgers, tender grills, mocktails, milkshakes, and so much more. Corporate and events catering
No,
available.
don't do anything
Our
now.
social media
Don't do
pages for
anything now,
more
please.
info
We
or call
right in the middle of the show.
031
No, don't, please, not now, please. Whatever you do.
Taste with Kick.
The Al Shazia Weekend Winter Sale now on. 20% off all ladies and girls abayas, 15% off all plain and branded abayas, 20% off all Samira kaftans, 20% off selected kurtas. Warm up to our sizzling specials this winter. 3 days only, 11, 12 and 13 June. Al Shazia, the scarf specialist. 215 Sparks Road, Overport, Durban. Call 031 207 6462. Al Shazia.
Shimmer, sparkle, captivate. Nothing less than a
The time is just gone 8 minutes to 10 a.m. as we head towards closure this morning's edition of News and Views. And just a reminder to our listeners and our viewers, we are talking about the promotion of equality and prevention of unfair discrimination amendment bill. We're talking about PEPUDA, and we've seen the United Ulama Council of South Africa issue a letter to Muslim organizations calling on the organizations or the various organizations to obviously draft a letter, because there is a closing date for submissions, which is the 30th of June. And we're going across to the panel right now. And once again, we're going to Advocate Aslam Bava. And Advocate Bava, just to look at you mentioned liability, and I think this is important for us to understand in terms of liability, and also at the same time, what this bill also talks about is imposing financial obligations, where on the one hand talking about budgets to implement measures that promote equality and eliminate discrimination, but also in terms of the consequences as a result of non-compliance. So this obviously is problematic in itself, and also in terms of small businesses, in terms of NGOs, community-based organizations, in terms of finding the money. So again, we're talking about a financial obligation, and we're also talking about liability.
Yes. So just let's take a step back to understand. First, in terms of PEPUDA as it currently stands, or the Equality Act, what we have is the imposition of liability and the responsibility being placed primarily on the state. This bill now seeks to extend this element of liability. Like I said, firstly, it's a strict liability, and then it wants to include community-based organizations, faith-based organizations as part of people who have a responsibility to avoid what it terms discrimination in a very broad sense. So it places now a responsibility on NGOs, it places a responsibility on the mosque committees and boards of trustees. All of those will now have a responsibility of not only doing what they are supposed to do, but to ensure that they do not in any way act in such a way as to not prevent. In fact, they have a positive obligation in terms of this amendment bill to prevent. So that is the one portion that they want to introduce in terms of the definition of the state. And then very, very ominously in terms of Section 9 and in terms of the 9A that they want to introduce, it says that there has to be a proactive engagement by such bodies to prevent any sort of discrimination, which is now the broad definition of discrimination. And going further, it says that let's assume a person gets up in a mosque, in a masjid, and says, I object to the imam saying X, Y, and Z. This bill prevents anybody in the congregation or the imam from retaliating. Now, the definition of retaliation is not put in the bill, which means that retaliation would mean a counter opposition to you. Sorry, sit down. The imam is addressing something else, and this person says, no, you are retaliating. You're not allowed to. You would be held in contravention of the bill, of the new act. And then in addition to that, it imposes not only a penalty, a financial penalty, but it also imposes a criminal liability. So you would then be basically acting in a criminal fashion against the law if you are not to take steps and to proactively promote or deal with such form of wide discrimination. So it's on a practical sense, this just completely obliterates any division between what a religious institution would have, an imam's talk in the mosque, the right, for example, who leads the prayer, all of those kind of things. It has a permeating effect, and the implication, like you say, would have a financial implication on organizations and trustee bodies and people being hauled into court continuously for criminal sanction.
Yes, Shukran for that. And Stephen, we've got about 3 minutes to go. I'm going to give you about a minute. Just final thoughts?
Yes, absolutely. And I want to just agree with Advocate Bava and what Dr. Solomon said. It's time for us as faith organizations to take up our stand. And if you look in the Fourie judgment, where the Constitutional Court made it very clear that the religious beliefs held by the great majority of South Africans must be taken seriously. And we've erred in that regard. We have not taken up our grounds as religious organizations. And I think it's time, and we from the ACDP side offer that I'll be heading up this issue in the Justice Portfolio Committee. Hopefully it doesn't ever get to the Justice Portfolio Committee, but we will be opposing it with every means to our disposal to ensure that religious freedom is enshrined as per the Constitution, and that this Amendment Act does not see the light of day. So thank you once again for having me on the show. It's much appreciated, and I look forward to working closely together.
Thank you very much for that, Stephen. Faisal, you've got a minute. Final thoughts?
I think, we now can stand as independent candidates, both at provincial, national, at every tier of government. And if we're not finding resonance in any political party, perhaps it's time for faith communities to identify individuals that can be voted into various structures, and within those structures then to be in the positions where certain our political or religious interests are represented at the levers of power. So I think from our perspective, we'd like to call on absolutely every person of faith. Obviously, the Muslim community is our base. To strongly object on, freedom of religion SA, the website has got the templates. UCSA, as you said, have called for it. And, we are hoping now to mobilize within the next 10 days or so, our communities to go and download these templates. We will provide them as well to object both as faith groups, as individuals, and also to send a clear government a clear message that faith-based communities are not going to be overridden, that we are a political force. And we can coalesce when it's necessary in the interest of protecting, in this case, freedom of religion. I think this onslaught has to be opposed in absolutely every way possible.
Well, shukran for that, Faisal, and also to the panel, to Advocate Bava, to Stephen Swart, and to you, Faisal, as well. We thank you for your time with us this morning on Aslam Media. All the best to you. Assalamu alaikum, and wish you well.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Well, it brings us to the end of this morning's edition of News and Views. And once again, this is a matter that needs to be taken seriously. I think we basically scratched the surface, but provided a good overview as to what PEPUDA is all about. And this is the reason why there is all this call for objections. And at the same time, just to remind you of the deadline is the 30th of June. The United Ulama Council of South Africa have issued a communication in this regard, and there are draft letters that are available as well. So this is something we definitely will follow up. We will keep our eye open on over the next few weeks. But for now, the time is just gone 10 o'clock. And once again, it's been wonderful being in your company this morning here on Salam Media. Next up is going to be Juice 29, Sheikh Tawfiq Ibn As-Sayyid from myself and the rest of the team. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.